Hi, folks. Welcome to the Green Pill Podcast, where we talk with health providers about how they've helped their family, their friends, their loved ones get healthier. We're going to go really behind the mask here, behind the wall, and get a sense of providers, therapists, clinicians, and how they live their lives personally with their health and how they help their families. Because who else could share with you how to get your parents healthier, how to get your sister go to therapy than an actual therapist? So here we go. We got Jasmine McEwen, licensed clinical professional counselor in Baltimore, Maryland, or just outside Baltimore. Welcome, Jasmine.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, so excited. I think I was just saying you and I are so aligned on really getting the emotions out, sharing them, identifying them, because only then you can deal with them, even if they're
Absolutely.
hard. And another thing, I saw in your interview with us on our Green Pill website was really having your cup full as a provider before
Yes,
helping others, and it can't always be that way, but focusing on your own personal health and wellness. As you know,
absolutely.
folks, I do coaching around sleep, food choices, movement, and actually emotional health as a full spectrum. So I work with a number of therapists like Jasmine, and we really help people get both the mental, the emotional, the heart, and the practical stuff to implement it. With that said, Jasmine, could you just tell us a bit about you, how you got to where you are today, how you chose to do this? Yeah, that would be a great start.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's weird because it's actually changed over the years, but initially what got me into health was a negative experience. So I was
Hmm.
12 years old when I first saw a therapist, and this therapist told me that there were no limits to confidentiality. So that means that everything stays private. She said everything I told her would just stay between me and her, and no one else would know what I had to say. Now, if you're a therapist or you ever been in therapy, you know that's not true. Therapists were actually required by law to report if there's any safety issues that are going on. So I'm thinking that I can tell this woman anything and that everything is going to just stay safe between me and her. That's not the case. She ended up sharing everything I told her with my parents and with school staff. And it just made my life so much more chaotic for like the next couple of years. And I
Oh my
felt like
God.
no child should ever go through this. That's actually what first made me want to be a therapist, was just wanting to right a wrong and say, no, no child should ever go through this again. This is ridiculous. So I started off wanting to be a child therapist. And I was like, this is my mission since I was 12.
Wow, that was rough. I mean, you remember it too. Obviously, it was the genesis of your career, but I'm sure you
Yeah,
didn't forget even before you started your career. You're like, wow, I can't believe they did that. So, okay, thank you for
exactly.
sharing.
Of
So, okay, you
course.
got into that, and then you wanted to be a child therapist. And then tell us more. Then what happened?
Yeah, so I made it my mission and I studied in actually Pennsylvania. I first went to
Okay.
University of Pittsburgh, but the campus was in Bradford, PA. So it was like a culture shock because I'm
Mhm.
coming from New Jersey and I'm going to Bradford, Pennsylvania, which was just like this remote rural area in the mountains. And I wanted to study psychology, be a child therapist, and I saw very quickly after I went to undergrad and then graduate school, there are so many kids that are dealing with trauma. And I did not feel like school prepared me to deal with the level of trauma that I saw. For example, like my first experience, one of my very first patients was a fifth grader. And the issue that was making him come to therapy was he just witnessed the murder of his father.
Oh my
Literally,
God,
like two
that
weeks
was your first
prior,
patient.
it's always
Oh my
something
God.
like, I feel like it's usually extreme. And I was just like, what? Oh my goodness. Like, I didn't feel like I had the proper training on how
Mhm.
to help him. And so I quickly learned if I'm going to make it in this field, I need to learn how to work with people who have trauma. That's honestly what taught me that. And then honestly going through that process, I was like, man, working with kids is hard because when you work with kids, you have to work with their family, you have to work with
Mm.
their parents. You can't just work with that child. And not everyone is always on board with what a healthcare provider suggests. And so I found it to be really challenging. And after working with kids for a couple of years, I switched to working with just primarily adults. That's kind of how I
Mhm.
got to where I am.
And that's how you got to adults. And so kids were tough because you had to navigate like four different relationships in one, at least, something like that could
Exactly.
be. Okay.
Right.
And yet you did start where you said you were going to start when you were 12, so that's cool. And
Yeah.
you followed through. And then tell me about adults, because I know you work with adult Christian men as one of your focuses, but you also work with
Yes.
folks who are severely depressed, just generally. And are there any others?
Yeah, so sexual abuse is the other focus. And with adults, that's been a journey as well because
Mm-hmm.
I started off just seeing so much trauma. It felt like everybody that I was working with had some kind of addiction issues or something with substance use, and there was some sort of abuse in their history, whether it was physical or sexual. But I think the word trauma has become a buzzword, and I feel like it also scares people. So when I
Mm-hmm.
say, like, yeah, I want to help people do trauma work, I feel like people are very turned off by that because the initial reaction I usually get is, oh, that sounds really scary. That
Yeah,
sounds really
let's define
intense.
trauma if you don't mind. I won't put you on the spot,
Yes.
but like you're so right. It gets
Ooh,
used, especially nowadays in pop
it's a
psychology. It's
buzzword.
like trauma, 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 trauma. And I'm like,
Everything's a trauma. Everything's
I
a
mean,
trauma.
my Uber
It's
didn't come on
definitely
time and I waited for 7 minutes. you know?
right, and I'm traumatized by it. So, trauma, if you look at the DSM, which is the book that therapists use to diagnose people, it's created by psychiatrists. It's defined as a deeply disturbing experience that has to happen to somebody where they are either potentially exposed to violence, so you either witness violence or something that could be life threatening, or it happens to you, something violent or potentially life threatening happens to you. So it's
Mm,
witnessing or experiencing something that is potentially life threatening. That
mhm.
is how it's defined in the
Okay.
DSM.
Okay, so that's how it's defined. And then do you have another view on it, or do you stick with that? Both are
I
good.
stick with that. Yeah,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
definitely stick with that. I think that the more objective we can stay, the better, because when we
Hmm.
just allow room for definitions to expand so far, then we're
Hmm.
just at the point where nobody even knows what it is anymore and it's to each their own. And I think that can be really dangerous.
Hmm. Agreed. I think we struggle to define our terms nowadays, especially as we're so
Sure.
online. And
Mhm.
and just to give folks an idea of what's coming up, so we're hearing about Jasmine, her background, how she helps the people she helps today, and then we'll get into some of her personal health stuff she's gone through, stuff that's working really well, some challenges or opportunities she's had, and then we'll get to some stories with her patients, so how they've helped their families, how she advises them, and how she's helped her family, friends, peers. And what I really like that you're doing is like talking in stories, because I think people really respond to that. So,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
I guess where were we? So you help people who are really depressed, adult
Yes.
Christian males who are experiencing, and how do you help them typically? And then you have trauma as well. Yeah.
Right. So we were basically saying how I started off just doing trauma work, physical sexual abuse, but I found that that was
Hmm.
scary to people. And so I
Hmm.
sort of moved away from trauma, even though that's still what I do. And I'm
Hmm.
trying to focus on people who have depression because I feel
Okay.
like that is just probably the most widely talked about mental health disorder that we have. I think depression and anxiety are pretty common. And
Hmm.
so the way that I got to men, particularly Christian men who have been sexually abused, it was actually after a really hard work shift. And this was pretty recently that I switched to this focus. I just didn't feel like the people that I have been talking to were aligned with me. I felt like I'm really burned out. I'm really tired. I just don't know how I'm going to continue this because this is like a mission that I've been on since I was 12, wanting to be a therapist. And here I am just feeling completely miserable. And my fiance says to me, who is your ideal patient? Like, who is the
Okay.
person that you would want to like get up in the morning and help? And I thought about it, and immediately, like, I'm closing my eyes thinking about this. The first thing that comes to my mind are men. That's the very first thing that comes to my mind because I feel like men, there's not as many spaces for men that I see as there are for women. And I know that it's not a competition. Anybody who's suffering should have access
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
healthcare. But I
Hmm.
think that when it comes to men, especially in mental health, they just get discarded and forgotten about a lot, especially when we talk about abuse. The statistics that we have just from our organizations, our research organizations, I think they're very skewed. You'll hear that 1 out of 6 men are sexually abused, for example. And I just believe the number is a lot higher than that, in my personal opinion. I think
Hmm.
it's more so 1 out of 3, 1 out of 2. I think it's the same as women.
Wow.
It's just not
Wow.
talked about as much. But when you just if you just look at people's personal lives, people who have dated men, people who are friends with men, so many of these men have these experiences of being sexually abused. They just don't talk about it. And they might also not even know what they went through was abuse. So I just want to create a space where that can be dealt with, because it is just such an unaddressed wound that I think is in our society.
And I think that's a perfect segue to continue on that subject of, well, and I'd like to get to your personal health,
Yeah.
journeys and what you've learned from you. And so touching on trauma, both physical or sexual violence,
Hmm.
deep depression, both of those require the patient to trust you first.
Yes.
Second, I mean, it requires, how should I say this? Like, they really need to empty their cup to you. I mean, to get into
Yes.
sexual trauma, which I'm by no means, literate in, it's something so deep. It's not just like, hey, I'm anxious at work. Hey, my girlfriend, I feel insecure. I mean, this is serious, serious stuff. And I commend you for focusing on men, because I think according to APA, 82% of self-harm is men, if
Yeah,
not suicides. Um,
absolutely.
and it's something you really focus on. And I think it's important. And we can maybe get into how you can talk to men in your family who are experiencing
Yes.
unhealthy behaviors generally, which often come from psychological issues. I find like some of the closest people to me in my family where I'm like, hey, like you're about to develop this disease, or hey, like it looks like your
Mhm.
doctor's saying you're not doing great. And it's, oh, okay, okay. It's like, that's not an answer. You know what I mean?
It's not.
If
It's not.
50% of the population is answering that way to their kids or their loved ones, it's like,
It's a
man,
problem.
yeah, and we can, and so you're an expert at communicating with men about really tough stuff, and that's like almost like digging for gold in a haystack, a really hard thing to do. So I think we should double down on that. Could you tell us a bit about, switching gears, to your own personal health journey? Like, how did that
Yeah.
coincide with you going through grad school, you having these therapy clients who probably
Yeah.
give you a lot of stuff to think about, and it might be tough to deal with. So tell us a bit about your health
Absolutely.
journey too. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, my health journey, I will be honest, I didn't really even pay attention to my health until I got
Mhm.
into college, because all
Uh-huh.
throughout my childhood, I always was in sports. So, I was always
Uh-huh.
exercising, I was always moving. And
Mhm.
I think it's the freshman 15, like when you go to school and then you gain weight. I did the freshman 40. I don't know if
Wow.
that's even a thing, but my
Uh-huh.
first year in school, I actually gained 40 pounds. I was so stressed out. I had an academic scholarship, so I wasn't focused on anything except I got to keep my GPA up so I can
Mhm.
stay in this school. And that's the first time I noticed anything about my health, because going from New Jersey to a higher altitude in the mountains, I actually started
Mhm.
getting nosebleeds when I went to school. And it
Mm.
was just something that was so bizarre. And I remember when I was in the hospital, this is probably like the second month that I was in college. So here I am, this like little
Wow.
18-year-old in school, away from home. I'm having nosebleeds. I'm in the hospital. And they told me I had high blood pressure.
Mm.
And that was the first time I'd ever heard anything about my health that was not normal. It was
Mm.
high blood pressure. Anytime I ever got checkups before, my blood pressure was fine. Like, I never had any issues. And I realized the correlation for me was I stopped exercising. I
Mhm.
stopped working out. And that truly just led to so many issues for me in terms of my health. And I made the distinction because I had to look at, well, what is different? Obviously, I'm in school, it's a stressor, it's a new environment, but what has changed about me personally?
Mhm.
I stopped exercising. And I know even now in my life, if I'm not exercising regularly, my mental health suffers and my physical health suffers. So that's something that I would encourage anyone that's listening to this to do, is to really look at, if you're going through any sort of change in your life, if you're feeling
Mhm.
bad in your body, try to
Mhm.
understand and identify what has changed about me. Behaviorally, what am I doing differently? So that's been really pivotal for me, because once you identify the problem, then you
Then you
can
can
start to
talk
work
about
on the
it.
solution.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. First it's the what, then it's the how.
Yes, always.
That's a big one. Okay, so exercise for you, since you did it as a kid so much, maybe your body's habituated to it. I can't comment on the scientific basis for that. That's always kind of when I
Yeah.
train folks. When I used to train folks, I'm like, hey, were you athlete when you're a kid, and the ones who were like need exercise. It's like
Yes.
really
That's what I
crucial.
think too.
you know
Absolutely, because I was just so used to it. Like, I ran track, I
yes,
did basketball, I did
nice,
soccer. So the sports I
nice.
did, there was a lot of running. And
Yep.
so to go from exercising regularly to not exercising, it's not good. There's irritability, you don't feel
Yep.
great in your body, and it's just not a good way, I think, to even start the day. So for me, I
Okay,
know
so
when I don't exercise, my health is trash.
exercise is a big one for you. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna give you a silly one yesterday. I'm gonna give you a silly one. Have you looked how many of your calls are on Zoom? Because you could get the treadmill that moves while you're on Zoom or the bicycle that moves. I don't know if
Oh,
that's any
yes.
therapists do that. So I don't know, just
I
shouting
don't
out.
know. Like, that's a good thing to think about because a lot of them are. So I have my own practice and I
Okay.
try and everyone I see to be in person, but I
Yep.
also still work full time at an outpatient mental health clinic where I
Nice.
see patients in all different levels of care. So those are
Mhm.
mostly virtual and
Oh,
like,
really? I thought those would be in
yeah,
person. Yeah,
you would think, right? We're in a weird state. There are some
for
people
sure.
who are like, I want in person, and other people they gotten used to being
hmm
at home. They're like, I don't want to
hmm
leave the house. So it just truly depends on the person.
Okay.
It really
Okay. That's I would never have guessed that outpatient mental health would be on Zoom, but
virtual.
I must have think had a different definition for outpatient mental health, like a
Mhm.
center of some sort. It could be anything. Okay,
Yeah.
so exercise was a big one for you. Any other big ones that you want to take away? Anything you're doing now that's been cool for you? Anything you want to share with folks? Otherwise, we'll jump into the hard conversations around hard conversations.
Yes, we can definitely jump into that. I will share one more tip, something
hmm
that has helped me tremendously, especially since I do work from home a lot, is just
hmm
having a distinction between work and my personal life. Because for me,
Okay.
that used to be the drive home. So if I'm
hmm
in an office and I drive home, that used to be the way I decompress. But
hmm
now, if you're working in the same space where you're relaxing, you have to
hmm
do something to have a distinction between your work and your personal time. So for me, I
Okay.
have like a night light. So during the day, I'll have a brighter light that's on, usually the light that's in this office space. And then when I'm done, I turn on my night light. It's like this little colored light that I brought from Amazon that tells me, okay, it's time to relax. And usually I just watch like a nature documentary because it takes me out of what I'm doing. I just get into the life of an animal for like an hour and then I decompress.
That's one I've never heard. So you might see my face like being surprised because I've never heard that, but it makes actually a lot of sense, and only a psychologist would think of training themselves with a different color light. That's
It's
amazing.
really helpful. Do a different
No,
color, do something that's decompressing. I like to do the nature documentaries because animals are just very simple. Like, if you ever watch an animal documentary, all they want to do
mhm.
is just take care of their babies and find food. That's literally it. It's very simple. Whereas people were a lot more complicated. So,
We are, and we all deal with people all day, or at least I do, and you do.
yes, exactly.
So talking about dealing with people,
Yes.
so the genesis for this podcast for me was, my mom was mentally ill my whole life. She was schizophrenic, and she passed away when I was 17, which was rough and maybe a blessing, honestly, for her. So I always thought I could do more, but I was always the one that did a lot, even as a kid. Like, I was the one who would try to regulate her, bring her back to reality. My
Yeah.
grandma, we ended up taking care of her a lot, my sister and I, because my mom wasn't there. And so I did a lot of like coaching and organizing doctor's appointments and following up. And just that was a big part of my life, and seeing my older relatives, as an immigrant, as a child of immigrants, rather, who aren't super healthy. They just don't, they think they still live in the fields of Ukraine,
Mm,
digging for potatoes. But even in their generation, they didn't do that. And so they
right.
eat that way, and they don't move much because, folks have sedentary jobs, and then they end up getting chronic health conditions. Plus, our country is just a really tough place to live, for so many reasons. So,
Right.
getting off my soapbox here,
Mm,
to really step off the pedestal or the podium, I just think it's important that we have these real conversations with our loved ones and our family. And so I'd love to
yeah.
hear any patients you've coached through that, or just if you want to start with yours, go ahead right away, and then we can kind of draw out what worked and what didn't.
No, absolutely. First, thank you for sharing that because that helps me to know, especially personally, why this is important to you. So it's interesting because the way that I deal with patients, it's a little bit different in terms of how I help patients help their family. It's a tiny
Mm-hmm.
bit different than how I help
Mm-hmm.
like people in my
Mm-hmm.
personal life. So with
Mm-hmm.
patients, I talk to them about the drama triangle. Have you ever heard of
Okay.
that before?
Vaguely, just recently, but just tell everyone's listening. Yeah.
Yes. So this is Cartman's drama triangle. It was created by a psychiatrist in like 1960, Stephen Cartman, and it basically tells us the different roles of conflict. So if you are trying to coach somebody or get anybody in your life to take their health more seriously, that's a conflict because something that you want is not
Mm-hmm.
happening and that's going to create some discomfort for you. And so, what this drama triangle does is it breaks down the three different roles of conflict. There are victims, there's rescuers, and there's persecutors. A lot of people who are trying to help someone with their health, they are in the rescuer role. So that's where I start with my patients. If you're trying to get somebody to make a change, typically they're in the rescuer role. And sometimes they might feel victimized if that person is not taking their feedback or their advice. And then for persecution, that happens as well because when people feel victimized, they can then move into a persecutor role, which is where you're just now being aggressive
Mm-hmm.
with somebody. And none of
Mm-hmm.
this is going to get your needs met. So, first, I have the patient identify okay, so what role are you in right now? Do you feel victimized by this person's inaction in terms of them not taking care of their health? Do you feel like you have to go and step in and be a rescuer? And like literally 9 times out of 10, my patients, almost all of them will say, oh, I'm a rescuer. I just want to help people. I just am there to help. And I'm like, oh, okay. So as a rescuer, that means that you foster codependency, you enable bad behavior, and you have to have victims around you. And then all of a sudden, people are like, whoa, hold on, wait a second, what? That is not at all what I thought I was saying I was. But I think it's because people don't understand what these roles are and what these roles do. In order to truly help another person, being in a rescuer role, being in a victim role, or being a persecutor, just lecturing them or yelling at them, it's not going to get
Mm-hmm.
you the results that you want. So what this triangle does is it says move from the drama triangle to the
Okay.
empowerment triangle. So the
Mm-hmm.
empowerment triangle, it's basically the opposite of the drama. Instead of being a victim, we're going to move from a victim to a creator. Instead of being a
Okay.
rescuer, you're going to move from a rescuer to a coach. That's probably more so
Mm-hmm.
this type of work that you do. And instead
Mm-hmm.
of being a persecutor, you're going to be a challenger. So that's what I do with my
Mm-hmm.
patients. We first identify what role are you in. I kind of shock them when I tell them about what these roles really are, because a lot of people feel like, oh, I'm a rescuer, but that's not a positive thing. And then we talk about how to move from the drama triangle to the empowerment triangle.
And so moving from the drama triangle to the empowerment triangle, how would someone maybe in one sentence, what mind shift would they do to do that today if somebody was listening to this? Like in maybe just a
Yeah.
quick, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in order to move from drama to empowerment, you have to first identify what role you're in and
Hmm.
then empower the person that you're trying to help with resources at the end of the day.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. And so when you have a patient who's sitting there as a rescuer, I'm just going to self-identify as
The
maybe a
rest,
former rescuer, maybe a rescuer
I
in
was
remission.
too.
Okay, cool, cool. So how in that circumstance, I'm a rescuer, so I'm feeling upset that folks
Mhm.
aren't. I'm feeling upset because I'm going to be hurt in the future because this person's
Yes.
not taking care of themselves. Is that more or less it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's
if
the
I want to
victim.
move to a coach, yeah, it's
Mhm.
weird because it's like a victim, but I'm also a rescuer. Is that
Yeah,
right?
people can be both. Yeah, you can be
Okay.
both.
Okay. Because I would definitely say both. Because for me, yeah, anyway, I would feel like a victim in many ways because I'm like, well, who's going to be taking care of you? Um,
Exactly.
okay, I moved from rescuer victim towards coach, and
Hmm.
instead of being a victim, I would be coachable, or what's the word? I'm sorry,
Creator.
creator. So then I moved
Hmm.
from being a victim towards a creator and a rescuer to a coach. So as of now that I'm a coach and a creator, what am I doing with my sibling who's like not taking care of their health?
Right. So what you're doing differently now is you are seeing your sibling as a resilient person. You're seeing them as
Mhm.
somebody who is capable. Because
Okay.
oftentimes when we're feeling victimized or we're rescuing, we don't think the person is going to do the
Mhm.
task that we're asking them to
Mhm.
do. We don't think they're
Mhm.
capable. But we have to give
Mhm.
people an opportunity to be capable. We need to
Mhm.
collaborate with them. And so what you're doing is you're giving them resources and you're also assessing for different barriers. So, for example, let's say you give someone a
Mhm.
resource. Hey, here's
Mhm.
this clinic I found. They
Yep.
offer free therapy. They do telehealth. So you can't use the excuse of, I just don't want to drive anywhere. I can't afford it. It's free and you can do it from your home and you have a phone. So what's next? Like what's the next excuse? Well, I just don't want to call. I hear this all the time. Like, I just don't really want to call. I have phone anxiety, so I just don't really want to
Oh
get on the
my God.
phone. Or I just don't really have the time to do it. Okay, so then what you would do with them is say, so what's hard for you about calling? You don't
Mhm.
jump in and just make the phone call for them. Because if
Okay.
you do that and you set up the appointment and then they miss it, what's going to happen? You're going to feel like a victim again, and this
Yes.
whole thing starts over. You're going to feel burned out because you're working harder than them. So, what you do is you give them resources and then you assess the barriers in terms of what is preventing them from accessing those resources.
And that's where the coaching comes in.
Yep, you got it.
Nice, because and just reflecting what you said, like in the hypothetical you gave, there's a hey, here's this free clinic. It actually happens from home. All you have to do is call. Person says, I don't like phones. I don't like to call. And
Right.
instead of you like slamming your fist against the wall and being like, "Are you kidding
Right.
me? You don't like phones? You talk to your friend all day."
All
Say,
day.
okay. You say, okay, so what don't you like about phones? And then they say,
Yeah,
well, you have to wait on hold, and they're never respectful when you
sure.
try to book an appointment, and there's so many like steps to sign up. And then what would you say in that case, like if we're getting really
Yeah.
into the weeds?
Yeah, great question. So, in that case, I would say, okay, then just go and submit a request online. You can do
Uh-huh.
this virtually. So you can use the online option. If they're like, no, I don't want to use the online option, then what you
Hmm.
do in that case is you
Hmm.
just assess, okay, the pros and cons. So, what do you think is going to improve about your life once you get access to
Hmm.
therapy and you have a
Hmm.
safe space to talk or you finally get a doctor? What do you think is going to be different? Oh, well, then, I'll probably feel better and I won't just be kind of feeling so stuck all the time. Great. So, what are you willing to do to not feel stuck? Like, if all you had to do to not feel stuck was make a phone call and then give yourself a reward after you do the phone call, how would that be
Hmm.
for you? So, you
And
just
as
ask open
someone's
discussions.
open questions. Okay, so one tip is like listening, finding action points, open-ended questions,
Yes.
and rewards,
Yeah.
and following up. I imagine like nudging and tapping on the shoulder and following up is helpful. Is that right?
It is definitely helpful. And this actually gets right into the other piece of this, which is what I do a lot with people in my own life. You have to assess the stage of change that people are in. So,
Okay.
stages of change, this is very big. If you've ever
Yeah,
heard of
give us the
motivational
concept.
interviewing, oh, I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. So,
Mhm.
it's just like how with the drama triangle, we have the three different parts. With the stages of change, this tells us where a person is at in terms of whether or not they're ready to make change. So it starts off with a stage called pre contemplation. And
Okay.
this is basically your person who, so let's say this is somebody who drinks too much. And
Okay.
somebody in their life is like, hey, I feel like, they're starting to develop alcoholism. In pre
Okay.
contemplation, you don't even think there's a problem. They don't even think there's a problem. No, I don't drink too much. I just have a few
Mhm.
glasses after work. This is normal. I just drink socially. Everything's fine. They do not believe there's a problem at all. So the
Okay.
way that you talk to somebody who doesn't even believe there's a problem is going to be different than the way that you talk to someone who does. So in pre contemplation, there's very specific techniques that we use in therapy to help that person move towards change. Does that make
Okay, so
sense?
you've got pre-contemplation,
Yes.
where they don't think there's a problem, and then next step is
Contemplation. That's the next
contemplation.
step. This is where most
Mhm.
people are when they come to therapy and any person that's like accessing health services, by the way.
Okay.
Usually they're in
Contemplation.
contemplation. You know there's a problem, but you are not doing anything about it. That's
Okay.
contemplation.
So but when okay, so someone So taking this, our sibling at home who
Yeah.
has mental health anxiety, won't leave the house, or
Mhm.
agoraphobia, kind of like something happened and she just, won't leave. Okay, so if she
Right.
has no idea that's a problem, she's like, no, I like TV, I like sitting on the couch. That's
Right.
pre-contemplation in your
Right.
view. In
Mhm.
contemplation is like, yeah, I think maybe I should call the therapist, but she hasn't done it yet, more or less. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And then the next stage is preparation or planning. So this is when the person has looked up therapists, they have
Okay.
numbers to call, or they
Hmm.
have different platforms that they might be interested in using. So they've
Hmm.
done the research.
Okay.
So that is planning or preparation. And
And then
then
the fourth one is
action.
action.
Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
favorite. I
Okay.
like when people are in action as a therapist. It feels
Of
good.
course. Of
And
course.
action is when you're actually doing the behavior change. So you're going to therapy, you're going to your health appointments, you're exercising regularly, you're eating healthy, whatever it is that you were having difficulty doing, you're now doing that. So that's the action stage of change. And then there is maintenance. And maintenance
And
is when you
yeah,
have been doing this behavior change, usually for around at least 3 months. At least 3 months is when
three
we say,
months.
okay, this is when this can now become a habit.
Wow. So 3 months on a habit. Okay.
Mhm.
And how do you implement these 5 stages of change from pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, action, and maintenance in your
Right.
practice? Hmm.
Yeah. So that's a great question because then the last stage is relapse, where a person can now
Oh,
start from the beginning. So the way that I implement it is I first identify what stage of change are you in? What stage
okay.
change is this person in? So you're usually, if they're coming to therapy, if they're coming to talk to me, usually it's contemplation. They know something's wrong, something's
Hmm.
not working. That's what brought them there. But
Hmm.
there's really not a commitment to action. They don't know what to do. So
Hmm.
after we identify the stage of change, then there's specific interventions you should use for each stage. So with
Okay.
contemplation, what you want to do is highlight the ambivalence. You want to highlight to that person, all right, so you're saying that you have this problem, but you're not doing anything about it. So you want to really check in about that. So, what are the barriers here? What is it
Hmm.
like to have this cognitive dissonance to know that there's something wrong, but you're not doing anything to fix it? Because there's something that's causing that person to be in inaction. And we want to get to the heart of what that is. Maybe it's they don't think that they can do it. Maybe it's literally they're just fatigued. It could be an energy issue. It could be their
Hmm.
thinking around it. We want to figure out what that is so then we can help them move forward.
Hmm. And so, taking those 5 stages, you often see, like I guess, with family and loved ones,
Yeah.
especially as health providers, they usually come to us with some kind of question,
Yes.
which I see a lot. And that's typically a contemplation phase. And then there are some barriers to action. Either they're scared of discovering something worse when it comes to like really
Yeah.
serious medical things, or
Mm-hmm.
um, the schedule doesn't line up because they have kids and they're very busy with a job. They're
Yeah.
not sure about
Time.
the cost. So there's
Right.
a lot of
Cost.
barriers. So you identify the barriers.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you, with patients, and I think this is instructive for anybody, how do
Mm-hmm.
you, when you identify one or two barriers,
Mm-hmm.
what's next?
Next is you help them overcome that barrier, overcome that obstacle.
Hmm.
So, for example, like we were talking earlier about people with phone
Hmm.
anxiety. I don't want to get on the phone.
Yep.
I just don't want to talk on the
Yep.
phone. Okay, can
Yep.
you do it online? Is
Hmm.
there an online option? Is there an email option? Is there a text option?
Hmm.
Is there something that you can do to motivate yourself or reward yourself after you do this task? Looking at the benefit of what's
Hmm.
being done is so important. So I'm a big proponent of people writing things down. So I will often
Okay.
have my patients write down, what are the benefits of me making this call and getting access to this service?
Okay. Good. So, benefits, and then just like zooming out for a second, so folks have the 6 stages
Yes.
which they do and they can put it into action, and any given stage there are barriers.
Yes.
So you zoom in on the barrier, ask them what's the scariest thing, what's the best thing, and then what would be the outcome, so future ideation and future
Yes.
projecting. Can we go a little bit meta for a second before we come back to earth and say, when somebody says they have phone anxiety in 2023, are they
Yes.
subliminally often saying that they don't want to do something? And then obviously phone anxiety is one, but could that be
Sure.
brought into a bunch of things. And what do you do, especially, well, one thing as a health provider and a therapist, and then
Hmm.
second, give me your answer as just a human. When somebody's obviously hesitant to do something, the excuse they're giving is
Yeah.
false typically. So what do you do in both of those cases, as a person and as a therapist? I'd love to hear.
Yes. So, as a therapist, if somebody's telling me they have phone anxiety, I get to the root of that. A lot of people just say very surface level things or just
Hmm.
kind of buzzwords or things that they've heard. And so, I will get to, all right, well, let's talk about what that means. Anxiety is typically based in fear. So, what are you afraid of happening? What are
Hmm.
you actually afraid of? Oh, I'm afraid somebody's going to judge me or that I'm not going to know what to say. Okay. So,
Hmm.
let's literally take the time to write down what you
Hmm.
say. Hi, my name
Hmm.
is XYZ, and I'm
Hmm.
calling to see if you guys are accepting new patients.
Hmm. Great.
Literally,
Okay, so you
period.
make it practical, like you get as practical as possible. And
Yes.
yeah, in my coaching too, like I tell people, get blackout curtains. Sun, any light at night wakes you up, makes your body thinks the sun is there. You're not going to sleep as well. And they say, well, my husband, I have to ask him how to put them up. And I'm like, okay, well, do you have trouble with these conversations sometimes? Well, yeah. I
Right.
said, okay, let's make a script. Let's get the cost down.
Exactly.
Let's get the time
Mhm.
required. You know, so okay, got it. So that's
It's
a
very
practical
true.
coaching and support. What's the
Mhm.
follow up on that? Next session, it's, hey, did you do it? Why
Yes.
not? Not why, but what made you do it? What not? What went well? What didn't? Is there anything I could still help you with?
Exactly.
And then when it comes to your personal life, if you don't mind me jumping
Oh,
over there,
yeah. Let's do
like
it.
jump into it. Give us a narrative. Give us an anecdote if you can. One time where
Absolutely.
you had a false
Absolutely. So in my
excuse. Yeah.
personal life, you can imagine there are people who have come to me saying they wanted to start therapy, but I cannot see them for therapy because they're
Of
in my
course not.
personal life. That would not be objective and I might be a part of the problem. So that just would not work. So I have given people, so many people in my personal life, resources like family members, and I've
Hmm.
gotten hit with any and everything you can think of. Oh, well, I just didn't have the time to do it. I haven't talked to you in a week. How did you not have the time to do something that takes literally 1 minute in an entire week? What are you doing that you don't have the time for this? And so in my personal life, I feel like I have the advantage of being able to just call people out even harder than I necessarily would as a therapist. As a therapist, I'm going to challenge you, but I'm going to
Yeah,
do it in
yeah.
a professional way. In my personal
Hmm.
life, I will just say, why are we committed to suffering? It seems as though you are
Mm.
working hard to stay in this space. And I often, and I actually shared this story with my cousin where I used to do the same thing. So that's why I can call you out on the BS
Mm.
because I
Okay.
remember, I will never forget, I was in a therapy session and I was trying to convince my therapist how depressed I was. I was like, I just had a bad day. And they said to me, well, was 100% of your day bad? Because your day's not even finished, mind you. And I'm like, the whole day is trash. Just put it in the trash. And they said, well, not 100%, maybe 80%. And I was like, no, 100% of my day was bad. And I literally had to take a step back. I'm fighting this man to talk about how depressed I am. I'm fighting to stay sad. I am fighting to be in this state. We need to really look at what we are fighting for because when something is familiar to us, it becomes comfortable. And anytime you're asked to leave your comfort zone, there's going to sometimes be defensiveness that comes up. But I really would say to people in my personal life, like I shared that with my cousin, don't fight for the things that are hurting you.
Mm.
Fight for wellness. Do not fight for your illness.
And that defensiveness, which basically, oh, I didn't have time, is basically some conscious or subconscious or unconscious excuse. And then you say,
Yes.
hey, you seems like you're fighting for suffering, not for healing. Like you're trying to
Yes.
hold on to this state where you're upset. In the case of needing therapy, or you're kind of
Mhm.
down, honestly. And how do people react to that? Because in my family, we
Yeah.
are very implicit communicators, I would say. Like, we don't really do screaming matches. We don't really do calling out. People don't want to hear it. Like, we're very like to each their
Yeah.
own, which is hard for me. And my grandpa, on the other hand, from my other side of the family, was like, Russian soldier in the army, very like
Wow.
survived the Holocaust, super hardcore guy, was just always telling people what to
Yeah.
do. And he's very good at it, but nobody wants to hear it. So I have a
Mhm.
mix of both. So it sounds like maybe in your family you can call people out. In my
Yes.
family, when you call people out, they don't like it. Um,
Yes.
So it's like
I
is
totally
and how
get
much
that.
like for me and like just for a small point, there's proselytizing, and then there's leading by example, which we can get into as well. But yeah,
Sure.
so when people get defensive, so you call them out. Give me a
Mhm.
really good example when that worked. Give me an example when it didn't work, and let's talk
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to just say my family is the same. They don't
Okay.
respond well to being called out. I don't
Okay.
know anybody that necessarily
That
takes that
does.
gracefully.
Okay.
Yeah, because it
But
hurts
you still
people's
use
feelings.
it. So tell me, like, because I was
Me
like
too.
taken aback when you said that. So tell me, how does it work? Like, because I want to
Yeah.
know. I want to use it.
Absolutely. So I actually helped my mom start to take mental health days at her job. Her job was just stressing her out, and she had all this time that needed to be used. And I'm like, Mom, why are you working so hard
Hmm.
for a
Hmm.
job that you do not think even values or appreciates you? Work for
Hmm.
you, work for
Hmm.
yourself, pour back
Hmm.
into yourself. You give so much to others. And it really helped. She started taking mental health days. Initially, in the moment, I don't think it was something that she necessarily felt good about hearing because I'm
Hmm.
saying you're not taking good care of yourself. But she came
Hmm.
back to me and told me she took a mental health day, and she does them now regularly. She will take mental health days at work where she will take off and she will do whatever. It's a day without expectation. So that's what I would encourage anybody to do that has time that they can use, that needs to take a mental health day, or they're wondering what the heck is that. It's a day without expectation. You can read, you can work out, you can stay in bed, you can do whatever you want to do, but you are not on the clock. So that's when it
I
works
think
well.
that's a really cool segment just right there, like mental health days, because I don't think people know what that is. And then with her, did you dress it up at all? Like, hey, mom, I was just thinking, I saw that you seem kind of stressed out lately. You're not sleeping. You got bags under your eyes. Or like, how dressed up did you make it? Or were you just straight up? It
So
depends on the
this is
person, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's actually, gosh, I love this topic. So it's a tip that I would give to anybody listening. The way that
Hmm.
I do it is I used to just lecture and nothing would change. Wait
Hmm.
until that person brings something to you. So my mom was
Okay.
just telling me about how she was tired from work. And so
Hmm.
then I'm like, oh, this is the perfect buy in. So
Yeah.
anybody that you're trying to talk to, wait until they bring up the issue to you because they're going to bring it up in some way, some form or fashion.
Hmm.
Then it's a good time to address it with them. Because if you're just coming to them and bringing it to them and lecturing them, people tune out people who lecture. They just tune them
Hmm.
out. They don't really
Yeah, they
listen,
do.
or they get defensive because they feel like
Yep.
you're attacking me and I don't want to be attacked. So I'm just not going to engage. So I say wait until the person brings it up to you. So if there's somebody that needs to go to therapy, it's not going to take long for them to say, "Man,
Hmm.
I'm just not feeling well today," or "I've just been feeling depressed," or "I'm super anxious," or "I didn't do this thing because I didn't have the energy." They're going to bring the problem up in some way, shape, or form. So that's your buy in, but let
Okay,
them
so
bring it
be
to you.
patient, wait, and maybe use informational interview or like open-ended questions, like we talked about in the
Yes.
barriers of stages of change. Like use open-ended questions, like, "Hey, how did your doctor's appointment go? How are you feeling? How's your
Right.
energy levels?" But then maybe wait till the second conversation before you hit them with the
Hmm.
mental health day suggestion. Like give it some time to
Exactly.
percolate. So it's a lot about perception, and I found that like as soon as I
Mhm.
made that switch in my like early 20s where I stopped telling people what to do and I started listening and just kind of
Yes.
repeating their words. And so I guess I recommend all folks read a few books about sales or emotional communication or
Yes.
mirroring or just typical kind of human behavior. And would you agree? Yeah, do you have any you like
Absolutely.
offhand? I like
Absolutely.
trying to think. I'll come back. They'll come back to me, but there's a few I like. Chris Voss's is really good. Never Split the
Yes, I
Difference.
was gonna say
You like
that
that?
one. Yeah, oh,
Oh,
I love
okay,
it.
nice. Okay, and I
Yeah, my
think he might
fiance
be
put me
from
on to
DC.
that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hmm.
that's a good one because he is was a hostage negotiator, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
he's talking
Yep.
about ways to, I mean, gosh, I guess you would have to communicate very well if you're helping in a situation like that intense. There are
Hmm.
books, they're like leaving my mind right now, but if I can think of it, I will
Okay, we'll
definitely
throw
bring
them
it
in the
up.
notes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And then let's see, we've got a few minutes left. So we've talked about some patient stories, some of your
Yeah.
stories with your mom. You got any other ones you want to share? Throw in there?
Yes.
Yeah,
One that
go.
did not work well so that people
Yeah,
know
please. I forgot.
it
Yeah.
doesn't always work out. No, that's okay. So
Hmm.
this is actually part of somebody who was in my fiance's family who
Hmm.
is just dealing with goodness, so much pressure from having children and just feeling like they don't have a space where they can focus on themselves. So there's relationship issues. And they came to me, they said they wanted to go to therapy. I gave them a free resource, like a resource where you don't have to pay for therapy, kind of what I was talking about earlier. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously had them in mind. You don't have to pay, you can do it from
Mm-hmm.
home. And they
Mm-hmm.
did not follow up with it. So I did the follow up, the check in that I was talking about. Yeah, I just don't have the time. I just didn't have the time to do it
Mm-hmm.
this week. And I'm like, okay, but how beneficial would it be if you had an hour to yourself every
Mm-hmm.
week? Weeks go by, then months
Mm-hmm.
go by, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this person still has not followed up with this resource. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to check myself and realize that I was working harder at their success than they were. That is the
Mm-hmm.
recipe to burnout. So if you
Okay.
are working harder than another person at their own healing, I would advise you to take a step back and stop that behavior
That's
because
the
you're
recipe to
going,
burnout. Yeah.
it is truly just miserable. You're going to burn out, then you're going to feel victimized. You might start persecuting, and you're
Yep.
right back in the drama triangle. So just honestly, you have to understand that not everybody is going to change in the time frame that you hope for.
Yep. That's a good
Acceptance.
one. That's a good one because you kept asking week after week, and you realize like they're not going to do it, and or
It
at
took
least they might
months,
do it, but you're nudging, yeah, months, right? Did
months.
they end up doing it?
No, still not to this day.
So there you go. Yeah.
Years at this
And
point.
no, she has like
Literally,
she bought a specific clock that just sits next to her like desk where she just checks.
I'm like, it's been years now and you've done nothing. Oh my
Like
goodness.
478 days, no, like 702 days.
I'm counting down. I'm just like, oh my goodness. But it's just something that I think people need to hear. Radical acceptance. We talk about it a lot in therapy. Certain
Hmm.
things you just have to accept. If you empowered someone with resources and they
Hmm.
still did not receive the help and you talked about the barriers with them, you've done
Yep.
all you can do. You have to be at peace with that.
You have to let go. Yeah, and I think that's probably sums up our discussion really well because there's many strategies and mind games and reflecting all to the good, all to
Yeah,
helping people see themselves in the mirror how you see them and helping them get to a better place. Ultimately, you need to be able to also let go, and it's that duality in life which I think we'd all benefit from having a little more, and we'd like people to treat us that way too. I don't think any of us
absolutely.
like to be nagged or persecuted.
No.
So that's great. So to sum it up,
Yeah.
your three big tips. I
Yes.
don't want to say them for you, so you give them to me, but I can always repeat them because this was so good. So go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So, call to action. Anyone that's listening to this, please write this down, type this in your phone. You do not want to miss this information. Okay. So, tip number one, identify the stage of change that your loved one is in. So, whoever you're trying to talk to about their health, look at the stage of change that they're in and then use strategies that correspond with that stage. Number two, you
Awesome.
want to identify your role in the drama triangle. What have you been doing to help them change? Do you feel like a victim? Have you been in there trying to rescue, do everything for them because that makes you feel like you're a good person? What stage are you in? Have you been persecuting them? After you identify your role in the drama triangle, move to the healthier role. And then the third tip that I would give is to just remember that you cannot control another person's behavior. And there's a quote that I share with all my patients. Is it okay if I read that?
Yes, please read it. Yes.
No one changes unless they want to. Not if you beg them, not if you shame them, not if you use reason, emotion, or tough love. There's only one thing that makes someone change, their own realization that they need to do it. And there's only one time it will happen when they decide they're ready.
Boom. That is it.
That's it.
Jasmine McEwen, amazing licensed clinical professional counselor outside Maryland. Please look her up. Where can people find you? This is awesome. I got a lot out of it.
Yes, I'm so glad you did. Thank you. Anybody in Maryland that is a depressed Christian man, please go to healwithjasmine.com and you will get access, actually, anybody that's listening to this, to a free training that I put together on how to become confident. That's healwithjasmine.com. Jasmine is spelled Jasmine. And people can find me at Jasmine McEwen on pretty much all social media
Awesome.
platforms. So, yes, I would love to connect there.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for this, for people to hear this, and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take it easy.